Ooh, I like it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last episode of this year's Sweet Hug, at least in Gothenburg. My name is Alyssa Nicoll. I am so humbled and honored to be here with you. We're going to be talking about a subject that's perhaps not as familiar to the .NET audience, but it's one that I am passionate about nonetheless, and I'm very, very excited to be here. I hail from a city in Oklahoma in the United States called Tulsa, and I thought it'd be fun to put up a couple pictures of my hometown. This is the schooner, so I went to OU for school, and Boomer and Sooner are our mascots, and so I try to get everybody to do the hooves, and my sister's like, that's not a thing, put your hands away, and I'm like, the hooves! So we have a lot of prairie dogs. We, for some reason, are known for our buffalo. I think it's back in the pioneer days, but yes. So I'm from Tulsa. I am a GDE. It's a Google Developer Expert. It's the Microsoft, like the Google version of like an MVP program. And I host an Angular Air podcast on Fridays. I'm a speaker and MC, a senior developer advocate at Progress, and I'm most known for my work in the Angular community because I MC for ngConf and have been a longtime friend of the Google team. So I'm a bit biased whenever I tell you it's the framework for you, but I'll give you some things to back that up. But yes, so let's talk about why it makes sense for .NET developers and really just for any developer looking for a front-end framework. So as I was thinking about choosing a front-end framework, I was like, you know, it's not really about your application at the end of the project, because I feel like no matter which front-end framework you choose, it is relatively on the same page. They have the same core features, right? Like they're all going to have a way to do routing or a library that they recommend to get routing. They're all going to have patterns for state management and et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And relatively the same performance, especially with some of the things we're going to talk about today with Angular that bring it up and past some of its main competitors. But when you're thinking about, okay, so if it's not about the application at the end of the project, who's it about? And I really feel like it's more about the developer, if we're being honest. I love Coraline. I just took my 5-year-old to see it. It's probably a little too scary. He was like, oh. So I don't know if you haven't seen it. It's a very fun claymation type animated film. But oftentimes I feel like this guy, this dad, at the end of a project where you're just like, oof. So I think that is like the theme of today's talk, I would say, is developer experience and why Angular caters best towards developer experience. Because, as we've postulated, at the end of the project, it's more about a developer. And a happy developer, although a framework, can't make all of us perfectly happy in our lives, it's a good start. And so some things that I was contemplating, I was like, what would make the perfect framework? Easy to use, thoughtful API, right? Not just bizarre keywords that you can never remember. Core features, which honestly are across the board pretty even. Architectural designs and patterns that are easy to grab and use in Grok. Resources, both internal and external, and so these are things like documentation, but then also community-driven learning resources. And then community beyond the learning resources they create, just the events that they host and their presence online. How welcoming are they? How easy is it to get connected within that community? I feel like is one of the main reasons I've stuck with Angular for so long, but perhaps it's not as important as this last bullet point here of growth. I think a lot of devs will sympathize with this, that you really don't want to take your time to learn and adopt something and like get on board with it, and then it's not around next year. And so I think growth is a very good metric in order to put your bet behind, because it is growing and thriving versus the alternative. And so with growth, the Angular Renaissance, has anyone heard of this term? For me, it's like kind of been overkill. Amazing. None of you. I get to be the first to say it. Okay. It's a term Manfred Steyer, I think, used it first, at least in my circle. And it's something that's been happening for the last couple of years, the last 5 versions or so. And it's called the Renaissance because it resembles the original Renaissance, which was all about human potential and human growth. And in this case, the Angular Renaissance is about developer potential and developer growth. And so DX is the reason for a lot of the changes that we're going to talk about. And if you're, I just wanted to like put this slide in here to say, we're going to go deep on some things, but we're always going to, I'll bring you back up out of it. And I understand that like a lot of people here at this specific conference don't specialize in front end. And that's totally fine. I just want to give you the feeling of this is what Angular is like. This is what the community is like. This is what the framework is like. This is what it feels like to write Angular in case you're contemplating it for your project, for your personal life, you know, etc. There'll be two sides that we will talk about, the framework and the growth, the renaissance that I was talking about. Show you some new features so that you can kind of just get a feel for what it's like to program in Angular, and then also a feel for the momentum that is happening within the framework. And then we'll also talk about the community, its heartbeat, and its health, in case you want to know if it's worth investing in. So yes, since 2016 and the creation of 2.0, which I was there the day they announced it, and it was very heartbreaking. And I think it's akin to, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. What happened with Xamarin Forms and Maui is very much what version 1 of Angular and version 2 of Angular felt like. They all of a sudden were like, you are not allowed to call that Angular anymore. That is Angular JS. And so 1.0 is over in this bucket, and this is 2.0, and we shall move forth. It was a good decision. A lot of the things that were holding them back in 1.0, right? It wasn't a good, proper foundation, but it was very jarring for the community. And so we haven't seen a time of such rapid development and exciting new features since they basically pulled the plug, right, in 1.0. But this one, they've done so much better, so much more stable, and it's been honestly a really fun ride. We're going to talk about 3 specific categories because it can be extremely overwhelming with all of the changes. We're going to talk about standalone, signals, and control flow. But I'll hit on things as well as like SSR, server-side rendering, and where we're at on the front end with that. So yes, standalone. It's available in version 14, stable in 15, and default in 17. And it's a pretty big deal as far as like the changes. I think there are other changes that are more impactful to developers, but this one is the biggest, I think, architectural change. Modules are something, and I took this screenshot or this screen flow here of me clicking through, and I'm showing the list view component, and you have the HTML, the CSS, the TypeScript file, but then you also have this module file. A module is a bucket for your components. Why am I teaching you about this? Because we got rid of this, right? We did. However, for a long time coming, modules will be a thing. So if you join a team that does Angular in their stack, you add Angular to your stack. Even if you're doing the latest, you're going to have a dependency that might have a module, and you're going to be like, what is this about standalone I'm hearing? So I just want to bring it to your attention in case you are in the Angular space. So modules are buckets for your components, but the team decided to get rid of them because they are unique to Angular, right? I think the team, I have a quote here of, yes, from the team, that Angular is one of the only web frameworks where components are not the smallest unit of reuse. And so as I was showing you that list view, we had the HTML and the CSS, which makes sense. We had the TypeScript file, which is the class, right? The bucket for the component. But then even below that was the module. And that's where all of these things are bootstrapped in and pointed to. And it was very confusing, honestly, for a lot of JavaScript people who would come over from any other framework, and they'd be like, you have to have a what? Where are you putting that? And so for an Angular person, we were very used to it, and it was almost like a painful thing of, you're taking my modules from me. But with them removed, the architecture was simplified, the mental model of your Angular app was simplified, and it did have performance improvements, like fine-grained lazy loading for components and directives that wasn't possible before. And so nowadays, whenever you go standalone, there are 2 sides to it. And so this is what I was talking about, where if you join a team or you create an app and it's standalone application, standalone means no modules. So if you have a standalone application, that means over here with this guy here, that your main app module doesn't exist. Your application doesn't know about modules. But there are a lot of hybrids. My team specifically, I work for Progress, and we make dev tools. And so you can imagine we're creating like components for people to reuse. And whenever they announced no more modules, you have to support people who still have modules. And so there are hybrid ways essentially to allow, like, you add in a module from a dependency, even though your application itself is moduleless. But there are two sides to it of getting rid of like an individual component or directive or pipes module. And then there's the main app module, which means your entire app would be standalone. So we do have a CLI. And I don't know, is there something like this, Thindle, in the .NET community where it's like, you know, you can run a schematic or you can run a quick command to generate something? Is like, yeah? Okay, excellent. I'm very new to it. I've done a bit in Maui, and that was my only experience last year. So I'm pretty sure there are equivalents to this. But we have schematics to help with all of these things, as far as some will do partial for you. Some will point out, hey, this file, this line, you might want to update this. But this is in order to go standalone, version 14 through 16 only. And this is mainly, I know you're not going to remember this is mainly as a reference in case you ever go through it yourself, God bless you, and you need to make an application in Angular standalone, and you're like, wait, what version did I need that specific schematic line? Right, yes, this. So if you start a brand new application, if you're in version 14 through 16, you can use the standalone flag, and that will generate a new Angular application and make sure it's standalone. But after that point, any new versions of Angular, they're just going to do it for you. You will not see modules, you will not hear modules, you will not speak modules, right? So they'll still be in the community, though, for a while. So I think we're going to buzz through. I've got some of these where I'm deeper in the details. But yes, so you need to make sure that your CLI version is up to date in order to, because the first time I tried to upgrade and be like, I want a standalone application, or I want to remove modules, it was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, right, update your CLI, make sure it's up to date, as well as your Angular version. So yes, we are going to flip on through. So with standalone being the old place for bootstrapping things, that was the biggest question of like, where do I look for that now? And most config that was previously managed in modules, in like app module or router module, they're now part of your app config TS file. So you can go ahead and open that bad boy up if you really are interested on where things are bootstrapped, or if you need to do things like with fetch on provide HTTP client, those types of things. But yes, so we have a new architecture of a component where now the component is labeled standalone true for now. Oh, actually, I think I have a really weird thing that I learned I could do. So currently, if you want your components to be standalone, you just add the standalone true flag. And then imports and providers, I get really confused on a lot of questions of like, wait, where am I adding this into? So the imports, or if we're giving access to HTML and like template things, directives, pipes, components, modules. Whereas providers are things like services or classes, and services are things with like HTTP calls and things that go and talk to the backend. And so that's where you're bootstrapping those in now. It's all in the component file. Some people are a little overwhelmed with that because it can get a little lengthy, as you'd imagine. Before, we could kind of hide the imports away in our module file, whereas now it's like our component file has like imports and then on the arrays. So it's a bit lengthy, but with things like tree shaking, right? It knows exactly what component or what pipe or what directive in your application is using exact dependencies. And so it can say, oh, we don't need to have that loaded now. We're going to tree shake that out. And so it really is more powerful, and it's laying the groundwork for some exciting new features as well. But yes, so I think we already talked about this. Imports, providers, moving right along. So Angular in the module-less world, a standalone Angular, is simpler to use, it's easier to reason about, less verbose to write, and it's faster to compile. This is just one of the examples, we'll talk about a couple more, of the Angular team being really innovative and taking bold steps, but all of them have been side by side with the community, and it's actually really cool to see. As a GDE, I'll be on calls monthly with the Angular team, and we'll get to give our own feedback of what we're seeing in the community, but we'll also hear from them of what they're hearing from their side in the community of we've had this bug or this feature request or this issue for so long, it's time to prioritize that. And they iterate so quickly. They'll be like, hey, overnight, hey GDE team, what do you think about this feature? Go download this version and try it and get feedback that way. And so it's been really exciting to see some of these changes. And I think that's one of the reasons, not necessarily the specific feature itself, but the fact of this relationship between the Angular team and the community and the actual, hey, I heard this was a need, let's go ahead and implement this. And doing it in a non-destructive way, I think, has been really powerful too, in a way that's optional. You know, as you need it, you can start implementing these things. Signals is one of those things. It's a built-in reactive solution. I hate buzzwords. There's a lot of buzzwords in our communities that we throw around, and they kind of start to lose meaning. I don't know if you've ever done that, where you say a word so many times, and at a certain point, it just loses meaning, and it's silly. I feel like reactivity is one of those things where it's just really buzzy and used a lot. So I wanted to just go bare bones, basic, what is reactivity? So let A equal 1, let B equal 2, and C is the combination of both of those. If we console log that or console write it, you're going to get C equals 3. Now, I actually tried this out. I have a screenshot. So I think we're pretty much the same Z's in our languages. But does anyone want to care to guess what C would be on the second console log after changing A? So this is in JavaScript, but I believe C# works the exact same. Anybody? What is it the second time? Yes! I need to get a prize for you. I'm sure I have one. Come find me. I'm sure I have something silly in my bag, like a toy or something for my 5-year-old that I was like hoarding. So yes, please come find me after. It is 3, my good friends. So yeah, we changed A, but like nobody cares, right? C is set up there. C was set when A was 1. So it will be 3 again. Did I do? Yeah. I was like, where can I run C# the fastest last night just to show this? And so I like ignore the errors. I was obviously not doing what the tutorial wanted me to do. But it, on the first console write line was 3. And then when I changed A, copy and pasted it again, ran it again, you got 3 and 3. And I was like, wait a minute. Does this mean C# and JavaScript are basically the same thing? My husband was like, stop, no, absolutely not. Don't say these words. So this is what we mean when we say reactivity. Because a lot of JavaScript developers are like, yeah, cool, but I changed A, so anyone who is using A, whether it's in functionality behind the scenes or whether it's in a template that's visually seen, I want them to update. So this is what we're talking about with reactivity, and this is the reason why a lot of people originally started reaching for these frameworks, because they wanted these kind of features built into JavaScript. They just wanted to be able to use something quick. Gone are the days when websites could just sit there and look pretty, right? There's a lot of functionality, and the current pattern, yes, I can say that still. I was debating if signals have been round long enough. They have not. The current pattern to achieve the reactivity that you desire in Angular is with observables and on push. This is just the go-to pattern that the community's like, do that. You'll have reactivity, things will update where they need to update. But with observables, with Zone.js, they come with a cost called change detection. I'm gonna blip through this super quickly because it is a bit boring, but essentially change detection, boring for some. For me, I stay up late at night reading about change detection. I'm a nerd. So change detection runs in cycles from the top down, checking all the bound data in a component. On-push and observables took a huge step in reducing the components that are being checked during change detection, because back in the day, Angular was chunky. And it was like, every DOM node must be updated because you said A equals 2, right? And it was like, oh, please slow down there. So with things like observables and with on-push, we were able to change the way in which we were checking things, but we're still checking the whole tree in places. And that's where signals come in. And so we're going to skip past Zone.js and its black magic, because this was me getting deep into convincing JavaScripters why we need to get rid of Zone.js. There are a lot, if you really want to upset someone in the Angular community, or maybe be their best friend. It's very polarizing. You could just be like, so about Zone.js, am I right? I don't know why, but people get really temperamental. But I think it was needed at the time for what it did. But in order to remove Zone.js from our applications, because it is not great on the performance level, we needed to have something, that reactivity that we were talking about, but it needed to look different. And that's the signal solution. So with tools like signals, this was one thing where I was like, hey Angular team, we shouldn't call it change detection anymore because it's no longer running through the tree, checking every node every time we have to update. It doesn't need to do that. With signals being built in and being the way they are with their reactivity, it knows what components have these variables. It knows who needs to be updated, and it updates them. It's not looking constantly through your application like, who needs A? A is now 20, right? Like it knows, oh, that component and that component. And so I was like, we shouldn't call it change detection anymore. And they were like, then what would we call it? And I was like, oh. So they're sticking with change detection, but we're essentially calling it the change detection of tomorrow, right? It's the new change detection. Creating a signal looks something like this, which might be alarming, or maybe it's familiar. I have no idea what your background is in code. But this is a way of, like, shop name. We're setting the signal, and we're saying it's a string. Menu items, we're setting it as an array, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the next one, we're reading those same things out. Signal is similar to like a variable, or it's not similar to a variable. It's similar to a method where you have to call it. So this dot shop name parentheses in order to get its value back out of it. And then you can nestle down into it of selected beverage dot name, selected beverage dot price. But you have to have the parentheses. You have to call the signal to get it. Updating a signal, there are two different ways. You can call dot set, just set a new value on it. Or you can call dot update. I want to show this way as well. Where's my time, man? Time, man, how are we? We're at 48. I cannot do math. Are we at like halfway? Anybody? Nobody? Like, yeah. Hey, I got a thumbs up. Look at me, guessing. If we're halfway, yeah, we can show it real quick. This is my cue to you. I have two different demos if you want to play around with some Angular, and I will also have an amazing resource at the end for playing around safely with Angular. This one, you can scan the QR code, though, or go to the bit.ly link, and we're just going to go to it together. Because I'm doing all this talking, and I'm not showing. That's so tiny. No one can see you, my darling. Please be larger. Thank you. OK. So here I was doing a direct comparison of variables versus signals. This is inside of my TypeScript file. One of the reasons I feel like we could be friends, you being a .NET user, I'm making assumptions here, and me being an Angular user, because we have types too. Now, yes, given anybody in the JavaScript community could use TypeScript, and yes, it is not as strict as your typing, I'm quite sure of that. However, it is a requirement. There was a day, back when I was but a young GDE, where the Angular team was like, should we use TypeScript? We're going to leave it up to you. And I was like, CoffeeScript. We should use CoffeeScript. And nobody, I still am made fun of because I was on the losing horse for that race. So TypeScript won, and it is the way to do Angular. So if you have an Angular front end, you will be using TypeScript. That's why it's a .ts file and not a .js file. Anyways, I digress. Variables versus signals. Here we have the same thing in the slides. And if I think, yeah, down here. I was like, I set them down in the class. A equals 10, B equals 10, C is combining both of those. E, on the other hand, is doing the same thing, EFG, but they're signals instead of variables. And so this one, it's like, don't blink, right? I'm going to click the button. I changed the demo on the next one, but don't blink. I'm clicking it. OK, so E plus F updated, but A plus B did not. They should be the same, however they are not. That's because variables versus signals with that reactivity, this is super basic, and everyone's like, wow. But I just wanted the most simple way to show the difference between a variable and a signal. There are obviously more complex examples of this. And we have things that aren't even variables now that are signals. Like an input can now be a signal. Or I don't know if it's released yet, but a component will be able to be a signal. We're going to get back to, do I have, 1 second. Let me look at our slides. I think our next slide is for our fancy version, which is super quick. I think we can make it happen. Good Lord. I was talking with, he works for Microsoft. He's here. I think his name is Mike. Is there a Mike who works for Microsoft who's here? Excellent. I was talking with Mike and I was like, how big is your slide deck? And he was like, I was something like 180. And I was like, oh man, you got me beat by 20. So I don't know. I thought I was big stuff. Apparently I am not. All right. Yes, we have a fancier version because I didn't like the fact that you could only click the button one time. I was like, what is that about? And so being true to myself, I made sure we had the very basic, simplest version, and then I made it a little bit more complicated for others who are ready for that. So we are still setting A, B, and C, 10, 10, and then adding those two. Same thing with E, F, and G. However, I am doing it to where the button continually updates and adds to them. And here you'll see me using that update method to make sure I update it. And this is a lot of jargon over here. You're like, wow, you really wrote a novel. It's here for you in case you want to look it up later and read about it and me geeking out about each thing. But as we click here, you'll see that it's updating the variables below, but it is not up here. So it's just the same exact demo. Let us dive back into our slides. Present. I really like My Little Pony, and that's why occasionally I have to slip Pinkie Pie in. If you have children or were from that era as I was, she is my soul animal. Signals are not observables. If you know anything about an observable at this point, you're probably like, she's talking about observables. Signals do not emit. They are not observables. They have one value, not a stream of values. All right? So I set EF, it was EFG. So I reset G. Oh no, we were resetting E. I reset E to a new number, and it was changing the combination variable down there, the signal that was updating. But it doesn't know about the past like an observable would. It doesn't know what it was previously set to. It has one value. There are other things. Oh, this was a question I was getting from the Angular community of, do I have to go and change out all my observables now with signals? And it's like, not unless you really want to. This is one of those, because we have, I talked about it right there. Because we have interop between observables and signals, so there's a method toObservable that you can call on a signal, and there's a method toSignal that you can call on an observable, right? You can go back and forth as many times as your little heart desires. There's absolutely no reason to throw the old observables and the old onPush out the window unless you really want to. There are computed signals as well. I think we're gonna blip past this real quick, where you call, I think in the more complex example I was calling computed. Computed signals are read-only, and they change when their inner signal changes. And that is a really slow animation. They are memoized as well, an important note. Yes, and they are only processed the first time. But I think we're going to skip past computed real quick and effects. There are multiple parts of a signal. So I used update. I used computed in order to change my signal. There's also an effect. This one, the Angular team was worried about people shooting themselves in the foot with it performance-wise. So there is a warning that comes with effects and signals. If you're ever doing signal work, it's really just for logging and external APIs, and you should reach for it as little as possible. Because if you did, you could get yourself into a performance issue with effects. But yes, signal inputs, I think, I need to check on when. V19 stable, that was me postulating. But they're in developer preview currently because we are in version 18. And so similar to a variable, now an input can be a signal. And I think I just want to take a breath and show you something. I show this at the very end, but I think this is going to be really valuable for a lot of you. The new Angular docs website is called angular.dev, and it's got some sexy animations as you scroll to the very bottom. Something I absolutely love about this website, they used all of the newest things, because everything that we're talking about is the newest and the hottest, but I go to all of the Angular conferences. I talk to all of the Angular people. A lot of them haven't even been to the new website, and it's been around for 2 versions. But one thing I love about the new website is that everything new that's coming out is implemented in this website. So you can download the docs off of GitHub as an example app, right? Open it up and see how it's being used. One of those things, if we keep scrolling, this was not loaded. We'll talk about defers in a little bit, but this was not loaded until I had scrolled far enough, and then it started loading in this heavier in-browser, like live demo where you can start programming Angular right away. The tutorial section, Mark Texan from the Angular team really poured a lot of love into this. I recommend, if you're just curious about Angular, go to the tutorials on angular.dev, and then this drop down right here, like anatomy of a component, control flow, which we're about to talk about, property binding, inputs and outputs, right? We're just talking about inputs and how they can be signals. You might be like, what the heck is an input? Or what does she mean by input? So if you go to this tutorial, you can walk through a bit of them talking about an input and showing the use of an input. And then you can go over here, and I'm like super zoomed in, right? But you can go over here to the different files and play around with it and see it in the preview live. So highly recommend if you're at all curious about Angular, the tutorials on angular.dev, stellar. But back to your feature presentation. Yes, angular.dev, and then you can read more about those in the docs or in the tutorials. But I think we're going to jumpity jump. So you can transform a signal input. They are great for component sharing. So whenever you're making a reusable component. In this particular example, it's fun with our dev tools for me to like poke at the devs and be like, are we using this feature yet? But for example, transforms are a great way of like for this dot disabled in this example, where if you want to disable the grid from being used or a form from being used, right? You can, on the template side, say the word disabled, but then internally you're switching over from a string, disabled, to being a Boolean, right? Of it is disabled true, it is disabled false. And so it's just this quick little, I don't know, it's like all of these are just developer niceties. They aren't affecting the user. It's going to be disabled or it's not going to be disabled, but it's just really fun for component sharing and making that switch. But yes, signal input transforms. That was just one thing that feature opened up for us. Transforms versus computed. Let's see, I think I want to talk next about signal inputs versus old inputs. So the old at input was the way of going about creating an input, a way to share between components. The new signal input that we now have the capability in preview is more type safe. And there are other things. I'll share this slide deck with you. Just ping me on the Twitters and I can export it for you in a manner that is befitting, like in browser or PDF, whatever you want. Because I'm not going to walk through all of the dirty details, but there are a lot of performance benefits for not only signals, for not only signal inputs, but for the next talk that we're going to have on the control flow. So yes, we talked about the difference between signals and variables, or observables, and inputs that are in preview, and then coming down the line is components. Very exciting stuff, not in preview yet. But again, it's helping solve problems like saying goodbye to Zone.js and change detection, essentially going change detection less. And so we're getting huge performance boosts. So a lot of times I'll get this question of like, when does my team need to use that? Well, are you having any particular problems with performance in a specific area of your application? Maybe you should go and try out signals instead of observables there, or maybe you should go and turn on standalone in that area of your application, because a lot of this, all of this is opt-in as you need it. So if it's not for developer experience, it's for performance, are the two really branches here. Yes, this was kind of my weird note because there are some things that are like little changes in the Angular community that you're like, that's a weird change. A lot of it has been laying the groundwork, and it's for things that we are just now seeing or that we will see in the next couple of versions, but they were just little changes that had to be made. Why now? Reactive built-in. We're going to go to control flow next, because I know I think 25 minutes, I think. That sounds about right in my head. Okay. So control flow is the new and fancy thing in Angular where we get to do things like ifs and for loops, but they're built in. So instead of having to, in the very top of my component, include like an ng-for, like import it from that package and then I can use it, it's built into the core, right? But it also has other benefits as well. So the new way of doing an @if, right, is going to look something like this. I think yes. So I'm replacing here the ngIf in a template. And yes, surrounding the blocks with @if, very basic stuff. And then after that, we're going to have an else. So if before I had ngIf hero bang hero for like if I don't have a hero, but instead of that, we're just having the else here. And then I think, yes, if you go into angular.dev, I should have on all of these little links for you to go and play with and learn more about. It's very basic stuff, but there are a lot of benefits that we gain from that. For loop, same way. This is how you loop through like item of items, and then I can print those out, item.name or item.id. The track is required, though. So you have to say track by the item index, track by the item. You get to choose what you're tracking by, but it has to have a way to know while it's looping what it's indexing by to call that item out. And so using track effectively can significantly enhance your application's performance, especially if you've got some chunky data loops on your front end. And so this is things that we highly advocate for. I think this was... Yes, turtles all the way down. So here I was using a for loop, and I was saying item items, track by item, and then just printing it out. And so it was just printing them out, and then if it's empty, give it a template to hold if it's empty, to say that there are no items if nothing's loaded or if the array or loop is empty. We also have switch statements now that are built in that come with all of this, where you can provide specific cases and show templates based on those cases. And let's see, deferring. I think she's probably, out of everything we're going to talk about today, she's the one. She's the one that has the most potential benefit of not only just like, it's fun to use as a developer, but the performance that we're seeing and the doors that it's opening. So deferring is, here I have my Kendo UI data grid, and it's surrounded by a defer. And by default, defer is going to load the inner component when the browser is idle. So your time to first byte when your website loads is much quicker if you can defer those chunky pieces, especially as on the Angular website we saw, if they're below the fold, right? Like why are you loading this massive demo if they might not even scroll that far? They might just click over to tutorials, right? And so with defer, this is just the default defer. There's a lot of flippin' cool triggers that you can utilize. So instead of just saying @defer, you can say @defer on viewport with this timer, and here's a placeholder. Incredibly powerful stuff, because now I can, on viewport means whenever that portion of the app is inside the viewport, it's visible, right, by the browser window, or I guess mobile browser window as well. But you can also say on interaction, when a user clicks on this, when they hover this far away. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff. The timer's more for, I don't know if you've ever had this problem. It's very unique. If your data loads too quickly, so you have a really thoughtful placeholder, but the data loads so quickly that it looks broken because it goes, right? And like your placeholder just flashes. The timer can be for like, okay, I want 4 seconds, nobody's doing that. But my example of, I want to show you the placeholder content for this long. So the combination of the two, because you can add these triggers. And then there's also for control flow, placeholder, which we talked about, and then @loading, which this is the part of after 300 milliseconds with a minimum of 2 seconds or a minimum of 1 second or whatever you want to put, just so that you don't have the flashing problem, which I'm sure none of us have because data is excellent. Thank you, my man. We gotta give some mega props at the end for the organizers and the team who's like working hard. They're amazing. Okay, I'm gonna get teary. Placeholders and loading. Yes. So this was me. I think I made a little GIF that loops. When you scroll, it says data will be with you shortly because I put a minimum of 4 seconds, and then you see the bullet points pop in. So this was very, again, the most basic example I could think of, but I wanted to show all 3 of these working. We got 10 minutes. We got a bug. But seriously, DM me on Twitter. My DMs are always open, and I will get you a copy. Placeholders loading. You can read more about Defer. They have their own section in our docs, or you can go pull up the tutorials and play with them in the browser. No downloading needed. Yeah, I think this was me, showing that, again, with the, like, you can go and have a defer with multiple triggers, and then you can have a placeholder with loading and error. Like, it just keeps going of the things that you can layer inside your template. I think here I am, yes, setting the sidebar, because my sidebar has 150 components. I went crazy. I was like, I want every component in our library in this sidebar, but not like in a cutesy way, like a live demo version, and it's like in this sidebar. And as I kept adding, like, she's chunky, and so when they released the defer, I was like, this is the perfect moment. And so here you can see, if you look really close, I'll circle it, where I'm scrolling, and when I hit the sidebar, you can see at the very end the smattering. This was the sidebar being loaded, and I don't have all of my 110 components loaded. I only have a few of them for this, so it's not as chunky as it will be once because essentially before deferred, I was having such loading issues with all of that data and with all of those components, I had to just comment them out. I was like, I can't have this in my live demo. So now I'm going back through and bringing them back to life because my sidebar in mobile view gets pushed to the very bottom. So when they scroll all the way down, that's when they'll finally hit that sidebar content. If they're on desktop, the sidebar is going to actually be a real sidebar. You might have been questioning my ability to name things, but at some point in its life, it's a sidebar. Anyways, so yes, that is where, and I think we can, I'm going to try to fast forward it to the very, yeah. So as I'm scrolling, it pops in. Where did we go from here? I think I just like went somewhere weird. Hold. All right, we have to zip to the end anyways. I wanted to talk for a second because it was so exciting. We started releasing these new features for SSR in Angular, and I was getting so excited. I was like, my husband is a React developer, God bless his soul. But he listens to me prattle on about Angular all the time, and I was telling him how exciting all these things they're going to enable, like real SSR and real hydration are in the front end. And he was like, this is so weird, Alyssa. When I started programming web, everything was on the server. And he's like, and then spas came out, and it was amazing. And I was like, oh, so it's like a pendulum. And one of my good friends who's an Angularite was like, no, it's not a pendulum. We are learning from our mistakes. It's actually a spiral, right? So like we might go back to SSR. We might now be, and I really think it is. I do a talk that's labeled this, and I really do believe that we will see a big wave of SSR, and I'm really excited about how Angular supports that. We're going to show this slide. So I essentially wanted to define the different, because again, I hate these words that are overused and they don't have any meaning anymore. CSR, SSR, SSG, and ISR. ISR, we have that with an additional library. It's called incremental static regeneration. So like with a third-party library, we have the capability to do that. React has that built in, so it's got that going for it, and if you're super passionate about that. But these are basically the phases, right? So CSR is everything's rendered on the client side. SSR, everything's rendered on the server side. However, if we go, present, which, by the way, is for SEO, because I think I have a slide where I show you the code before, and yes, I do. Because with web apps and spa apps today, oftentimes, I mean, unless you have any kind of SSR activated, whenever you download your application, whenever it first downloads and it first hits, it's going to have like app root instead of everything that comes with it, right? The whole app, because Angular hasn't loaded yet. It hasn't bootstrapped everything yet. It hasn't built everything yet, which really sucks for SEO because, as you can imagine, like app root's telling you zilch about this application. And so that's where things like SSR or SSG come in, because it's a bit essentially different versions. How far into server-side rendering do you want to go with your Angular application? So yes, I was given the 5-minute zoop-de-zoop, so I'm going to go and we're going to talk about this one. So this is after you enable server-side rendering. It's very, very easy to do. If you are in an Angular application and you want to do it, there's a CLI command, and it's super easy to enable. But this is whenever you open view source, not inspect page. When you open view source and you see the actual source that's coming down from the server, you'll see that we have CSS. We have, if I keep going, I think I scroll to the next part. We have the actual body of the application. The app root has actual content. It doesn't just say app root. And so our SEO is significantly better. Now, based on the problems that you're having in your application with SEO, with performance, with whatever it is, that's where you're going to go and say, what level of server-side rendering do I need to reach to? How far in do we need to go? Because there are different levels and they all have pros and cons. But that was just me doing a quick educational service. But I love SSR. I'm super excited about it. There are, upcoming. So there are some things in the SSR world and in the Signal world and others that are coming to Angular. In version 18.1, I love this. Like, they just randomly were like, new feature. And it was like really quiet. And like, oh, now we can have @let. Like, it was just super, super cute. And I was like, oh, thanks. That was fun. So there's a hot new feature with the @let operator that you can use now in 18.1 if you're super up to date. But on coming, partial hydration is coming, and we have a roadmap that'll tell you more about what partial hydration is. But if you've ever had something that was server-side rendered before it was hydrated. Hydration is when you add in the ability to like click on something and it has an event. That's hydrating your app. So before Angular or whatever framework you're using has a chance to hydrate your application, it's essentially a static app, right? That's like waiting for its DOM nodes to either be refreshed or be hydrated. And so we no longer do destructive hydration with Angular. But there is still this uncanny valley problem where before Angular bootstraps in and hydrates your app, if a user's like clicking on something and like nothing's happening, right? It's very weird as a user to see something but not be able to interact with it and not understand why. So we did fix the SEO problem, but we still have this uncanny valley. And I don't know why it's named that, but so resumability is going to solve this problem, and the Angular team is making steps towards resumability, partial hydration, furthering SSR with Angular. So excited, there's a lot coming up. I know I'm running out of time, so I want to hit on the other side of the tree that I put up on stage, the community. NPM numbers and GitHub numbers are on the rise. It is not the highest slope. There was a mountain really close by. At least the taxi driver told me it was a mountain. I would be laughed at if I was like certain circles if I called it a mountain, but it was very close to our hotel, very close to this venue. And I was hiking it and I was like, oh, this isn't bad. And I turned a corner and all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is a mountain. Never mind, I take it back, you are qualified. So it's not quite the curve that I'd like it, but over the last, since 2021, you can start to see the rise on the NPM numbers. And I also wanted to point out the State of JavaScript survey. We were the only ones, I think I zoom in here, I do a really big zoom. This is specifically, this survey is so detailed. But if you go to the frameworks, you can change it to interest, like I'm interested in using this framework. And the people who filled out the State of JavaScript survey, you always have to preface, because not everyone who uses JavaScript or frameworks in general fills out the survey. But the people who filled out the survey, it was the only one from 2021 that is rising in interest of any of the frameworks, which is fascinating to me. So that's why I would put my money behind Angular, along with some other things like just a big Angular nerd. But I think we are we at time? Yes! We are at time. Brilliant. I'm going to put up my splash screen then. And just thank you all so much for your time. Seriously, come talk to me afterwards. But have a wonderful day, and thanks for being at SweetTug, everyone. Bye.